Larry Murphy was born on the 7th of February 1966 to Lawrence and Sheila Murphy. They lived near Baltinglass, County Wicklow, in a little place called Stratford upon Slaney, a small village on the River Slaney, 6.5 kilometres outside Baltinglass. He had 5 sisters and 1 brother, Tom. He went to school in nearby Baltinglass and his teachers described him as an average student. He wasn't particularly interested in the academic side of things, but he excelled in sports such as football and hurling, and practical work like woodwork and metalwork. Basically, he was good with his hands like his father was, who worked in construction. As he came into his teenage years, it was noticed by the people close to him that he had a temper and it would not take a lot for him to lose the plot over the simplest things. He was no shrinking violet, and he didn't fear speaking his mind if he felt he was being wronged. He had a close-knit, select friend group, and many would stay in contact with him over the coming years, never thinking he had a dark side that was lying beneath the surface. At the age of 16, with his teacher's encouragement, he left mainstream school to become an apprentice carpenter, which would take him 4 years to qualify. His skills were in furniture making. Growing up in a rural area, his other passion was hunting. By the time he was 22, he owned a 12-gauge shotgun and would go hunting on a regular basis. In doing so, he developed the skill of navigation and sussing out the best places to hunt. He also built dens and lookout posts around County Wicklow, which is densely forested. He would use these developed skills for more nefarious hunting in the coming years. While Murphy was a skilled carpenter, it was also very niche. Not everyone could afford bespoke kitchens and pieces of furniture in the early 80s, so he would often take on work on building sites, doing roof work and second fittings in new and renovation projects in order to pay the bills. This line of work brought him all over Ireland, and he would stay in areas for a period until a job was finished, giving him a chance to get familiar with each area. When he was 28 years old, he met a woman, Mags, in 1994, who would go on to be his wife. They would get married and set up home in Castledermot, County Kildare, and have 2 children. In 1997, they would leave here and move back to Wicklow and set up home near to where Murphy grew up. Murphy, to all who knew him, was a hard worker, a family man, settled in a routine of having friends and being close to his family. Nobody saw any red flags, and he was never under the radar of Gardaí up to the point of when he did what he did. Tom, Murphy's brother, would say he was a normal child growing up and mixed very well with other children in the community. He was not a loner. He involved himself with the locals, and if he walked into his local pub, the Stratford Arms, he had no bother conversing with people. He had girlfriends who never reported him being violent or controlling, and even came across as a little shy, which they would say was endearing. He had a normal relationship with his parents and his siblings. But soon this would all change. While still living in Castledermot, County Kildare in 1996, one evening Murphy returned to his home after being in the pub. There in the house was Mags and her friend. Murphy wanted to go out again, but Mags wanted to stay in. By 8 p.m, he offered to drop Mags's friend home to nearby Castle Row before heading back to the pub. As they were heading to the friend's house, Murphy took a detour and pulled the car into an entrance of a laneway where he assaulted her. This friend managed to escape the car, but Murphy pursued her up the laneway, managing to catch up on her and grabbing her. Murphy explained that it had all been a big mistake and not to tell Mags. Believing him and being terrified at the same time, the friend agreed to return to the car, hoping that Murphy was being sincere and he would let her go. Murphy drove the woman home, but followed her into her house. With this, the woman fled to the bathroom and locked herself inside. Mags then arrived at her friend's house, as she had decided that she did want to go out that night. When confronted with this scene, Mags said that Murphy had told her what had happened, and whatever way the conversation went, the friend decided not to go to the Gardaí, and being the loyal wife, Mags didn't either. They all put it down to a misunderstanding and nothing more was done about it. A few weeks later, in a pub called the Glen Lounge in Donard in County Wicklow, a young girl was working there, and she noticed Murphy looking at her as she worked. She became more and more uncomfortable with his presence, and soon it escalated as Murphy became more drunk. Eventually, he leapt towards her and groped her in front of everyone. The whole pub came to her defence and Murphy had to be pulled off her. The locals, being protective, told Murphy to back off. A friend of her brother was also there in the pub at this time, and his name was Trevor Moody. This friend would become very relevant in what was to come down the line. This incident again was not reported to Gardaí. These would not be isolated incidents with Murphy. Once what happened, many a story would be told of Murphy acting inappropriately when he had drink in him, whether it be on his own in a strange town or city, or locally within his community, and even in front of his wife. Murphy was escalating in his behaviour towards women, but no one did a damn thing. He was never reported to the Gardaí. On the 11th of February 2000 at around 8 p.m, a woman, who I will refer to as Jill, could just about make out a man under a street light. He looked to be in his mid-30s, wearing a pair of scruffy jeans and a dark fleece hoodie zipped up to his neck. It was Murphy. The hairs on the back of her neck bristled. He was standing about 20 feet away from her car, with the fidgety edge of someone growing impatient waiting. Jill was 28 years old, had looks, brains, a steady boyfriend, her own place, and was a business owner of a hair salon in Carlow Town. She wasn't physically frail or easily fazed, and so she weighed it up. Men didn't normally hang around here like that, but she wanted to go home. It had been a long day at work and she had spent it on her feet. Her car was not the only car in the car park. Tightening her grip on her black handbag containing the day's takings of 700 Irish pounds, she hurried across the tarmac, clicked the central locking and tugged the handle. Suddenly, Murphy started towards her and was upon her in seconds, demanding money. Jill pulled the car door open quickly. With this, Murphy punched her in the face. A second punch soon followed, which led to Jill's legs going from under her, and she collapsed onto the driver's seat of her car. Jill lurched back up to grab the handle of the car door to close it on Murphy, but he was too quick. Soon he was in on top of her, pushing her into the passenger seat. Scrambling to open the door on the passenger side of the car, Murphy grabbed her by the hair, slamming her against the handbrake, leaving Jill more dazed. He then proceeded to start the car, revving the engine and taking off at speed, but it would only go a short distance to the other car in the car park, his car, that Jill had seen earlier. Stopping the car, he demanded Jill take off her bra, and with this he tied her hands. He also demanded she take off her boots. Leaning forward to do so, she couldn't, as her hands were tied so tight, so Murphy did it for her. He then got out of the car and went over to his own car, a Fiat Punto. Opening the boot, he then returned to where Jill was. He gagged her and took her out and forced her into the boot of his car. With this, he drove towards Beaconstown, which was just over 14 kilometres away. Beaconstown is in the parish of Kilkee and near Kilkee Castle, Murphy's old stomping ground, and where it is said he suffered many a rejection before meeting his wife Mags. Curled up in the fetal position with her wrists bound, Jill couldn't protect herself from the metal tools bouncing around the boot of the car. She tried to concentrate on breathing, but it was hard as her nose was broken and her mouth gagged. When Murphy arrived at his destination, he pulled Jill out of the boot and into the front seat, and here he raped her numerous times. Meanwhile, Jill pleading with him to let her go. Seeing a child's seat in the back, she knew he was a family man with one child at least, maybe a wife, a partner. Maybe he would have mercy on her. When he was done, she pleaded with him once more to let her go. He asked her was she married. Jill lied and said yes, hoping that if he knew she had a husband, maybe he'd think someone was out looking for her. Murphy by now had a calmness about him, and he began to talk about himself, how he had a wife, 2 boys and one on the way, and that his name was Michael. To Jill this was a red flag. If he was telling her all these things that could identify him, there was no way he intended on letting her go. Jill began pleading even more now with Murphy, but soon she found herself back in the boot once more, naked this time. Murphy drove them to Baltinglass, to a secluded wooded area, 2.5 kilometres from his home. Jill was taken from the boot of the car once more and put in the passenger seat. Murphy removed her gag and untied her and told her to make love to him. Jill pleading that if she did, would he bring her home. Murphy said he would. With this, Murphy raped poor Jill vaginally, orally and anally. By now Jill couldn't take any more and pleaded with Murphy. "If you have a gun, use it on me. I can't take it anymore," she said. The words were out before she could take them back, and they had the opposite effect. It was like she flicked a switch in Murphy's head. "I'll never see my wife and children again," he said. Jill asked Murphy for a cigarette. He refused and told her to put back on her clothes and get back into the boot of the car. Jill's blood ran cold and she became hysterical. He dragged her out, pulled her trousers on and tied and gagged her once more. Leading her to the back of the car, he put her back in the boot and shut it closed. With this, Jill managed to free her hands and, grappling for a weapon, the boot opened suddenly once more. She did not have time to grab a weapon except for an aerosol can. Pointed at his face, she pressed the nozzle, but nothing happened. It didn't work. Murphy was furious. He punched it out of her hand and slammed the boot shut, and then there was silence, not a sound. Suddenly the boot opened again, and again it was Murphy, this time with a plastic bag, which he put over her head. Jill tore it off and started kicking and screaming. Murphy stuffed the plastic bag in her mouth, pulled the bra that had slipped to her neck tight. With the last kick, Jill somehow felt the ground under her feet. She was out of the boot and could breathe again, and she was free from Murphy's grasp. With this, she ran. She could hear the car door slam and the engine starting. She thought he was coming after her, so she fell to her knees in a ditch and began to crawl to safety. But it was a ditch of barbed wire, and it tore at her skin, blood everywhere. As Jill looked over her shoulder, she saw Murphy speed away in his car. He wasn't coming after her, but soon another set of lights would appear, a jeep this time. 2 men were coming towards her with flashlights. Jill scrambled even more, forcing herself through the barbed wire, it tearing at her flesh, trying not to cry out in pain so they wouldn't find her. Suddenly a man's voice came, "Are you all right?" Jill crouched even more, and then another man's voice asked the same thing. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" Jill, relenting, said, "He raped me." The 2 men were Trevor Moody and Ken Jones. Trevor was the man in the pub the night Murphy had groped the young woman years before. Both men knew Murphy well and had recognised him as the man attacking Jill. Ken Jones knew Murphy too through work. Gathering poor Jill up, they put her in their jeep and told her she was going to be all right. The 2 men had been out lamping that night and heard the screams, and when they went to investigate, recognised Murphy and his car. When Murphy saw them, he fled, Jill not realising she was going to be saved. Jill was brought to Baltinglass Garda Station, where the 2 men gave statements as to what had happened. Jill was brought to hospital for her injuries, and later, when she was feeling better, gave her statement about the ordeal she had been through with Murphy. Meanwhile, Murphy returned home and his wife was in the kitchen. She was nearing the end of her pregnancy and had spent the day looking after her 2 boys. By now Murphy was well drunk from drinking whiskey by the neck, and when he entered the kitchen he grabbed his wife's hand and walked her down the corridor to their bedroom, took off all his clothes, climbed into bed and had sex with his wife. The next morning Murphy answered his front door to 7 Gardaí. Gardaí, knowing he had a gun, were not taking any chances with him. Leaving the door ajar, Murphy turned and went into the living room, followed by the Gardaí. He was arrested on the spot and read his rights. When brought to the Garda station in Baltinglass, it seemed Murphy was going to hold his hands up to what he had done the night before. He emptied his pocket of £444, saying it was his, and then took out £700, stating the girl's money. He removed his clothes and they were forwarded to forensics. When Gardaí searched Murphy's car, they found Jill's handbag, as was instructed by Murphy that it was there. But that is as far as it went. He would not speak to Gardaí until he had spoken to his solicitor. After speaking with his solicitor, Murphy was then brought to the interview room. Of course he played down what had happened, admitting to the first rape, but saying the second rape was consensual and he had no intention of killing Jill. He said that he just happened upon Jill and it was not premeditated and he only intended to rob her. But witnesses would come forward saying that he had been stalking Jill over several days. that he was seen earlier that night and had also been working near the salon at a construction site. When asked about Jill's injuries, Murphy said, "Well, she's alive, isn't she? She was lucky." Later that night at 8:05 p.m, Murphy was formally charged with rape, abduction and attempted murder. The Gardaí, looking at the evidence, felt that the savagery and the brazenness of Murphy suggested an accomplished predator. By now, Operation Trace was set up to trace, review and consolidate evidence on Ireland's missing women between 1993 and 1998. Is it possible that Murphy was their man for these women going missing? All the information they had on Murphy was forwarded to Operation Trace, and 3 cases stood out. A geographic profiling expert thought that Murphy was more likely to have killed the victims nearest to him: Jojo Dullard, Deirdre Jacob and Annie McCarrick. Murphy was living in Castledermot when Jojo disappeared from Moon in 1995 and is just under 11 kilometres from Baltinglass. Deirdre disappeared in 1998 from outside her home in Newbridge, which is just over 33 kilometres from Baltinglass. And finally, Annie disappeared in 1993 from her flat in Dublin, which is just over 62 kilometres from Baltinglass. The Gardaí also took note that because Murphy had taken Jill from Carlow Town back to Baltinglass, they felt he was responsible for the women disappearing, and he would have brought them there as well, as it was central and his home place. On Friday, the 11th of May 2001, Murphy was brought to the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. He had pleaded guilty to each charge of false imprisonment, assault, 4 counts of rape and attempted murder. Judge Carney handed down a total sentence of 15 years with time served, dating back to February 2000. The judge said he would suspend 1 year from each sentence due to Murphy's guilty plea. Even though a life sentence was available to the court for the rapes and therefore Murphy could be held indefinitely, Judge Carney chose not to use it, as he said so many of his cases had been overturned by the appeal courts. He did not want to take that chance of it happening again and Murphy getting a lighter sentence. On hearing his sentencing, Murphy fainted in court, but he soon recovered and was brought to Arbour Hill Prison. On the 12th of August 2010, Murphy was released from prison after serving only 10 years of his 15-year sentence. He got out early for good behaviour, but at the same time he had refused to take part in any rehabilitation programmes and never showed any remorse for what he had done. He spent his days in the prison joiner's shop, where he made podiums for the Special Olympics and made rocking horses that he sold to prison officers for their children. Murphy was described as a model prisoner, which in turn safeguarded his automatic entitlement to have a quarter of his sentence shaved off. Also, there was a question looming before his release, whether he would be put on the sex offenders register. It would be decided that he wouldn't, as the new Sex Offenders Act was not introduced until October 2001, and he had pleaded guilty and sentenced in May 2001. It would not apply to him, and therefore he was a free man with no parole or need to sign on at a Garda station or divulge where he was going to be living. The public were furious over this, but the Gardaí reassured them that he would be subject to post-release supervision. However, this was not feasible given the manpower it would take, and so it never happened, not long-term anyway. Gardaí also approached Murphy before his release to ask him about the missing women in Ireland. He refused to converse with Gardaí. Murphy's wife did stand by him until he was convicted. She would go on to have a 3rd little boy, which Murphy has never met. They are now divorced. Murphy's family reassured the public that he was not welcome back to Baltinglass, and no member of the family would be offering him refuge, and they have stood by that to this day. When he emerged from prison, he was greeted by reporters and Gardaí and a waiting taxi. His first port of call was to Coolock Garda Station to complain about the harassment by the press. He then went to Grafton Street in Dublin city centre, followed by Gardaí and reporters. Here he went amongst the crowd and shed himself of the clothes he was wearing and disappeared. The Gardaí had no idea where he was. Only free a few hours and already Gardaí had lost him. I'll say nothing. While the Gardaí could not find him, a reporter had more luck. Murphy had spent 3 weeks in Ireland before leaving for France, where he was closely monitored by French police once they were informed. Next, he moved to Barcelona and worked as a carpenter. But it is here that he would lose his passport after a sex worker took it. In May 2011, he returned to Ireland to get a new one. He would leave Ireland once more by boat a month later from Rosslare Harbour in County Wexford. Here he would go from France to Amsterdam and meet up with an old prison mate, Rory O'Connor, who was a double rapist and had been released from prison in 2008 and moved to the Netherlands. The pair worked and socialised together and shared a scooter as a means of transport. O'Connor would go on to live in Scotland, and in 2018 he would meet a woman, Diane Nicholl. She had no idea of his past, but when O'Connor was confronted by Diane's sister, who found out all about him, poor Diane would believe O'Connor, saying it was a threesome gone wrong. Believing him would cost Diane her life. On a night in August 2021, now engaged to Diane, O'Connor would beat her to death, and in August 2022 he was sentenced to 15 years in prison for her murder. Now that O'Connor is in prison for the murder of Diane, Gardaí are hoping that they can speak to him about Murphy and Deirdre Jacob, in the hopes he might have vital information about the case, given that he has spent so much time with Murphy as a friend and in his company when intoxicated and in prison. We do know that O'Connor was spoken to in the past about Murphy, as well as another prisoner, who told Gardaí that Murphy was involved in Deirdre going missing and that he admitted that he had murdered her. By summer 2014, Murphy was going by the name Lawrence Doyle, and he had found himself a new love, a well-to-do woman who was a jewellery maker in London. She shared a house with a couple from Ireland, and they had often encouraged Liz, not her real name, to invite him over. They had only been seeing each other a few weeks, but one summer's day Murphy accepted an invitation by the couple to a barbecue at their house. The man of the house thought Murphy looked familiar, and a few drinks in the penny dropped. He knew exactly who Lawrence was. The man confronted Murphy, and he at first denied who he was, but then admitted it. He was promptly escorted from the house. They immediately contacted the police, but there was nothing they could do, as Murphy hadn't actually done anything. According to sources, Murphy is still living in the UK, where he has been working between London and Birmingham. He has not come to the attention of police over there for any criminal offences. As of March 2022, Murphy has been ruled out as a person of interest in the cases of Fiona Pender, Fiona Sinnott and Ciara Breen, with circumstantial evidence linking Murphy to the disappearance of Jojo Dollard, Annie McCarrick and Deirdre Jacob. He remains a suspect in those cases.